Seeing our guest speaker in just a second, just a few logistical items. Those taking the one credit seminar or taking this as one of their two seminars for the environmental law class, I do have sign-up sheets here. If you're in the one credit seminar, you might put your paper on the pile up there at the end of the lecture. For next week, in general, the Huxley Speaker Series will be in this room, but next week is an anomaly. It's a jointly sponsored speaker, and it will be in Bond Hall room 105. So that's a heads up to those who want to hear about salmon boundaries and bandits on the Salish Sea, which is next week. Well, this Huxley Speaker Series this quarter is featuring our distinguished alumni. And today we are very pleased to have with us Huxley alumnus Mark Reis, and Mr. Reis is Managing Director of Seatac International Airport, which is, I learned, the 16th busiest passenger airport in the United States, providing service to over 33 million passengers in 2012. Mr. Reis currently serves on the Executive Committee of Airports Council International North America and is chair of its Government Affairs Steering Committee. He earned his bachelor's degree in environmental studies from Western, and he has a master's of public administration degree from the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University. And Mr. Reis was selected as this year's Huxley College Distinguished Alumnus for the Western Alumni Awards. So we're really pleased to have Mark here and looking forward to his talk.
Well, thank you very much. Well, thank you. And just to get me a little sense of who you all are, how many of you are current Huxley students? And then I know there's at least a couple current and former Huxley faculty here. So non-Huxley folks in the room? A couple? Not too many? Great. Well, I will try not to spend a lot of time remembering the past when I was here at Huxley and talk mostly about Seatac and what we're doing there. The title here says hiding in plain sight, and the two key words there are hiding in plain, because a lot of what I'm going to talk about in hindsight, once the project is up and running and the benefits of the project seem incredibly obvious and make a huge amount of rational economic sense. Operationally they work, there's customer service benefits, to say nothing of all the environmental benefits. But actually, when you start trying to track this stuff down and figure out, could we do something like this? What if we did that? This stuff actually seems very much like it's hiding. And so this is probably something that you will learn as you get out of here and go on in your careers, that much of life is in that conundrum, that it seems in hindsight to be very obvious, but it's really difficult to make happen. So I'm going to try and spend a little bit of time up front giving you a sense of what Seatac Airport is. I presume most people in this room have been through there at least once, or through certainly an airport. Anybody who has not flown in or out of Seatac in their audience? One person, two people. Okay, good. So you have a sense of the place, but you may not think about it in the same way that somebody who runs the place does. Let's see if this is going to work. Click, click. Underneath. Oh, I need to. I can run an airport, but I can't run this. Where am I pointing at? All right, well, we'll do it the old-fashioned way, which will tether me to this spot, evidently. So at Seatac, and like any airport, you can look at things multiple ways. This is, in some ways, a very simple but a very relevant depiction of how people who run airports have to think about them. So from a passenger point of view, you think about all sorts of elements, including the concessions and the gates and et cetera. But from our point of view, first off, you will hear from anybody associated with aviation, especially airlines, especially the FAA, certainly airports, safety is number one. And that sort of is an obvious statement. We have to do everything we do with regard to safety. Once we get past that, what we're really all about is throughput. We're moving people through the facility. And what we hear most of the complaints about in life is, you didn't move me fast enough. So Really what an airport is about is getting you in the door, through security, onto an airplane, and gone. And so throughput is a lot about what we think about. Second, customer service. We want to do that. We want to move you onto the airplane and out of the air, or off the airplane and out of the terminal in as good a customer service way as we can. And all of the above relates to infrastructure. In some ways, you can think of airports as project managers. We build stuff. I mean, how many times have you said to somebody you're traveling with, going through an airport, it seems like this thing's always under construction. Well, it is always under construction. And we went through a 10-year period recently where we built $4 billion worth of improvements in a 10-year period. And during that time, you were hard put to move more than 100 feet without having to go around a construction barrier. And that's sort of the reality of what an airport's all about. I mentioned throughput. One of the big parts of an airport's requirement is to serve its community is traffic. How many routes can we get to places that are important to our community? And in this day and age, the international service, connection with the world, is the most important thing we can do for the regional economy of Seattle and the greater Northwest. This shows 18 separate routes. There's a couple of routes that go to the same city by different airlines. There's 18 international routes from Seattle. 11 of those have been added in the last 6 years, which gives you, it's a very nice little metaphor for the reality of globalization of our economy. The Seattle economy especially, but really the Western Washington and the Northwest economy depends increasingly on connections with the rest of the world. And I spent a fair amount of my time, along with certain staff folks, worrying about where do we get routes next. Another way to think about Seatac is it is the busiest 3,000 acres west of Chicago and north of San Francisco. So this is the Alaska Airlines route map. And you are all familiar with how far away Chicago is to the east and San Francisco to the south. When you think about it, we put the city of Bellevue through our airport every single day in August, which is our busiest month. Just with passengers, not people picking people up and dropping people off, just passengers at Seatac on the average day, it's equivalent to filling Safeco Field, emptying it, and refilling it. So we fill a sold-out Safeco Field inside of Seatac twice every single day. So a few facts, and then once we get through this, we can move on to some of the environmental stuff. As Gene indicated, in 2012, we had about 33 million passengers coming through, people coming and going, over 300,000 takeoffs and landings. The people coming and going needed us to help them move 24 million pieces of luggage through the facility. That's not carry-ons, that's just the stuff they checked. Over 2 million trips in and out of the airport from a variety of landside sources, and almost 2 million transactions in our parking garage. So it starts to give you a sense of just the movement and the activity that takes place at Seatac. And then a sidelight, obviously our primary business is working with the airlines to provide them spaces to operate their facility or their activity, but a sidelight is just people buying stuff in the terminal, food and beverage, retail, et cetera. That was almost $200 million worth of sales in 2012. So after this slide, I'm going to start talking about some specific projects that we've undertaken for the explicit purpose of benefiting the environment, moving towards a more sustainable operation, and in the process, oftentimes, most times, saving the airlines or somebody else money. So there's more than one definition of the word sustainable. But they will seem like not sort of one-off, hopefully there's a bit of a theme, but one-off projects. We did that, and then we did this, et cetera. And there's some of that. Certainly some of the stuff was very compelling on its own. But if you want to get things done in an organization, it's important to articulate the importance of those initiatives to the entire organization. Make it clear why you're doing it. And we are blessed by having a couple of things that really help us keep the blueprint in front of us. On the left up there is a plan that our environmental folks put together. It was a 5-year plan on what we're going to accomplish, very metric oriented, quite quantitative. We're going to increase waste diversion from 25% to 50% by the end of 5 years. We're going to reduce energy consumption from this point to that point, et cetera. So there's 21 separate goals in that document, which really keeps the environmental professionals, the facilities folks they work with, et cetera, all focused on a set of goals. On the right is the cover to a document that our commission, we have a 5-member elected commission that governs the Port of Seattle, of which Seatac is part of. And they adopted a 25-year set of goals, and in there are some very aggressive environmental goals. So from my perspective, knowing my elected body board of directors, if you will, is fully in line with what we're trying to accomplish, makes it a lot easier to go to them and ask them for money to do some of this stuff. The document in the center is a statement of purpose and strategic goals for Seatac Airport that our management team put together. And I wanted to point out 2 words or 2 lines in there. So when we define, for the purpose of defining the mission, you'll oftentimes hear about mission statements, and they can be hokey and they can mean nothing and they just occupy space on the walls, or they can be incredibly meaningful because everything goes back to that. And your staff actually understands that you're actually paying attention to it. We hope our mission statement and our purpose and goals meets the second criterion, not the first. And so we said Seatac Airport's purpose is to promote regional economic vitality by operating a world-class international airport. That sort of states the obvious. Providing extraordinary customer experience and being a model of environmental innovation for our region and our industry. So when you think about what I talked about earlier about running an airport, to say one of the 3 things that is the purpose of running this airport is to be a model of environmental innovation for our region and our industry is a pretty remarkable statement. I don't know that you're going to find another airport in the country that would say their purpose includes that as one of 3 items. We have 7 strategic goals. They involve things having to do with cost for the airlines, environmental or customer service, employee stuff, et cetera. But one of those is lead the U.S. environmental industry, U.S. airport industry in environmental innovation and minimize the airport's environmental impacts. And I raise that, or I point that out because this is something that the 800 employees who work full-time for the airport, plus about 200 more who work for the port supporting the airport, see this every day in our conference rooms. They see it constantly as a statement of what's important to us, and it helps immensely on getting everybody lined up. So now on to some of the stuff we've been doing. One of the things we did first in the nation, we weren't the first, but we were the first to use a methodology that has now become the norm for the entire airport industry worldwide, is come up with a greenhouse gas inventory. To understand what we've got so we know what to do about it, obviously, is the first step. What this graph shows you is at the top in green is the greenhouse gas emissions in 2006 from the public, which is to say people coming and going from the airport, activity the public undertakes, either coming or going or on the airport. The vast majority there in the sort of reddish color is the aircraft emissions. Well, if a plane leaves Seatac Airport and goes to Portland, obviously there's emissions from the jets on the aircraft. If it's going to Paris, you got more because there's more fuel being burned. It has the exact same impact on climate change. Unlike particulate, unlike SOx or something, which you really care about its impact on the local basin, with greenhouse gases, it doesn't really matter where it's emitted because it's a global problem. So we can do nothing under federal law about the red. We can't tell the airlines to do anything about their emissions when they're on the ground in Seatac because it's all governed by the federal government. At the very bottom, you can't actually even see it unless you're standing, about where Gene is, but there is a line right at the bottom that is de minimis in the bigger scheme of things, and that's actually airport operations. The activities we undertake to actually run the airport is in that small little line. So much of what we have to do is try to influence the big stuff because we can't control it. And influencing the big stuff is not easy. But here is one of the things we've done is preconditioned air. So some of you who pay much attention looking out the windows at the airport before getting on the aircraft may have seen these big sort of 18-inch soft hoses being dragged around out there. That's running air, HVAC system, heating and ventilation to aircraft, and it is done oftentimes in places that have been in non-attainment areas, the communities where there's been a problem with air pollution. They do that by running diesel generators, which are only marginally better than running the jet engine on the aircraft to keep the aircraft heated or cooled, or to provide electricity to the aircraft while it's on the ground. We have put a new system in. We expect this quarter to actually get it operating for the first time. We have a central plant where we create ice at night using very cheap power rates in hydro that otherwise was going to happen anyway. It was going to go over the dams anyway. That creates the ice that we then use all day long to run this HVAC system for the airline. So instead of at the back of an aircraft, you can see it sort of right back here at the end of this aircraft. At the back of an aircraft, they've got something called an auxiliary power unit. It's actually a mini jet engine. It doesn't propel the aircraft. It's there designed to run a generator and to run their HVAC system and their power. By doing this, they can turn that off while they're on the ground. It saves them an enormous amount of money. As you can see, annually we expect to save about 40,000 tons of greenhouse gases. Similar project is electric ground service equipment. All those bags get towed around the airport, the aircraft get pushed back, you have these self-propelled bag loaders that pull up to the aircraft to move bags into the hold. Those are all traditionally run by diesel. Some are now run by CNG and other gas sources of fuel, but we are moving them all to electricity. And that too will clean up the local environment, less particulate, less diesel exhaust, et cetera, but more importantly, it will really reduce greenhouse gases like the preconditioned air. We've got one of the greener fleets you'll find for any institution, both some of the small vehicles you can see are electric. All of our cabs are required to either be CNG or hybrid vehicles. So this is one of the areas we can affect the public because we have a contract with the cabbies. If you want to operate out of Seatac, you want to pick people up, you got to sign a contract with us. If you want to have a contract with us, you've got to have a clean vehicle. So we do have some leverage to influence some of the folks who operate at Seatac, even though we can't really affect we can't regulate the airlines. And our buses that go out to our rental car facility are all CNG as well. Aviation biofuels is something we can't claim we have done, but it's something we're working on, and it has actually got the biggest promise. If you pay much attention to the airline industry, you've got a really resistant group of executives who are focused only on their bottom line. You've got a large aircraft manufacturer in Seattle, Boeing, that cares deeply about its customers, but it also recognizes wisely that environmental regulation could undermine the entire basis of their business. Hello there. If environmental regulation due to greenhouse gases so affects what airlines are able to do by way of aircraft, and they are unable to buy aircraft, Boeing goes out of business. So Boeing cares deeply about what's going to happen 20 years from now, 30 years from now, 50 years from now on the way we power aircraft. And one of the ways we can improve things, it will take some time, is by moving to biofuels for jet aircraft. And it seems somewhat preposterous, but in fact, we've done a lot of work. Seatac Airport, along with Boeing and Alaska Airlines, initiated this effort. And this is an indication of the report that was done on the subject of can we find sources of feedstocks in the greater Northwest area that can be converted to oils, which can be converted into jet engine fuel, which can go on aircraft. And the answer is yes. It's not economic to do it tomorrow, but we're going to move in that direction. And remarkably, the aviation industry realizes this is critical to their future. They're concerned about prices going up on petroleum fuels, which will make it uneconomic to run. They're also concerned about what governments might try and do. And the rest of us are maybe a bit more concerned than they are about the environmental elements of it. But biofuels have been proven to, one, be completely, the airlines can, and the regulators can be completely ambivalent on jet fuel made out of plant material, municipal solid waste, or other sources compared to petroleum-based jet fuel. Because the first thing, as I said earlier, the first thing we care about is safety. It will have no impact on the operation of the aircraft. In fact, it has been found to be marginally more efficient and cheaper to use jet fuel created from biofuels than from petroleum. So this is, unlike some of the other things which we've got up and running, this is something that's going to take another 10 years probably before it makes a big impact. But the estimates are as much of a 70% decrease in net greenhouse gas output from biofuels compared to petroleum fuels. That doesn't have anything to do with the combustion of the engines, exact same output from the engines in terms of greenhouse gases, but the greenhouse impact of getting the fuel to the aircraft from biofuels is enormously lower than it is for bringing petroleum from one of its sources to an airport in the United States, at least. This Greener Skies is a name that Alaska Airlines use for PR purposes, but it's way better than RNP OPD, which is what FAA calls it. FAA can out-acronym anybody. And basically the idea here is aircraft, when they arrive at airports, traditionally will be told by air traffic controller, drop down to such and such a height and level off and keep moving, and then they'll drop you down more, and you've all been on aircraft where you sort of see that happening. Every time they level off, they put the engine back in gear, if you will. When they're going down, they can back off a little bit on the power. In addition, this is the actual approach to Seatac Airport. Up there, hopefully you can see at the end of the lines, the Seatac Airport is indicated. The traditional route to come into Seatac, all about having to do with safety and making sure you don't get too close to other aircraft, is to go all the way up to shoreline, way north of Seattle, make a big turn if you're starting from the bottom left, and then line up with the runways and come straight down. And you do that for a variety of reasons, mostly because the technology is old radio technology from the 1950s. There's two radio beams shot up, one horizontal, one vertical, off the end of the runway. The pilot puts the aircraft inside the radio beam and either automatically or manually keeps it inside the radio beam, and you land right where you're supposed to land. Like I said, it's a 60-plus-year-old technology, and its margin for error is not very good. So you all have to get in line way up there, and at night, if you happen to be looking at an airport, you can just see all these aircraft, one behind the other, waiting to get in line. Well, if you use GPS, and I suspect almost everybody in this room has a device in their pocket with more GPS capability than we currently use on these aircraft, which is not to say they don't have it, it's just we don't have a system to take advantage of it. If you use GPS, you don't have to go all the way up there in blue. You can actually cut the curve over the bay in Seattle, nice low noise impact because you're over the bay, and come in much quicker. In addition, you can, on the right, you can see the stair step that I mentioned first versus the glide slope on the bottom. Literally, if you're arriving at Seatac coming from California, the pilot will tell you somewhere in the neighborhood of Portland to start your descent. They can basically put it in the aircraft equivalent of neutral in Portland and glide all the way into Seatac. So the amount of financial and greenhouse gas savings associated with moving to this technology is enormous, and in March of this year, Alaska Airlines will, for the first time, start doing this with as many of the aircraft that the FAA thinks they can safely put in this pattern. And we'll be the first place in the world to do this on a regular basis. And we're expecting another 30,000 tons of greenhouse gases saved through this tool. Almost back in the old days, when I came here in 1974, Gene was very kind to not tell you how old I was. So I arrived here in 1974 and got a student work study opportunity, and Huxley had somehow or another convinced the university to let somebody on work study run the recycling program for Western Washington University. Well, probably it's somewhere in this parking lot over here. There was a little house. Bert remembers it. Nick probably remembers that little house, which was the first home of Huxley College. It was a home that was seen better days, and it was the initial home for Huxley College. And then Huxley moved into the building next door, and this home was retained as the recycling center, which is to say there were about 15 55-gallon barrels there. That was Western Washington University's recycling program. It may well have been Bellingham's recycling program, because it might have been the best, if not the only one in all of Bellingham at the time. And I got to run that. I was a student work study director of recycling, which is to say I went and took the glass, the clear bottles out of the green barrel and put them in the white barrel. That was my job. Anyway, we've come a long way on waste reduction since that day. And airports are no different. We not only recycle in the obvious ways, we also are trying to influence our airline friends' habits by way of them doing recycling. So we built a new rental car facility that opened in May of last year, and when they were building, this is a $425 million facility, it's quite a substantial facility, and the contractor recycled 97% of all construction waste, which was one of the reasons it got a silver LEED status. But when you think about that, what's construction waste? A lot of metal and a lot of wood, right? And we used to take all of that to landfill. And we worked with them, and they did a great job, and it made economic sense. They could make more profit by recycling than they could from throwing stuff away. So that is a lot of what our recycling program is all about, is providing the incentives in the right place. And so, for example, pay as you throw. The airline's got two choices. They can take stuff out of the aircraft, and they can dump it in the dumpster like they always did, in which case we've got cameras, and they got to have a card, and they can't get access to the dumpster without using the card, so we know exactly who used it, and we know if they're cheating. Or they can throw it in recycling, and they don't pay a thing. So it's same old story, just like yard waste recycling, that you put a financial incentive in it, all of a sudden people take it very seriously. In addition, we went to the point we've got all of our concessionaires, food and beverage concessionaires, are composting all of the back of the kitchen stuff. So they've reduced their waste enormously by composting. We actually collect cooking grease and turn that into biodiesel. And we've recently started getting the concessionaires who are required to time out some of their food. They prepare sandwiches, et cetera, and they have to sell it by a certain date. That used to be all thrown away. We now are able to send most of that to food banks and another part of the recycling effort. Now, when I graduated from here, I got, oops, wrong thing. I don't know if I got a human ecology degree or an environmental education degree. I don't know what the document says, but I know I took the classes on environmental education. And in some ways, when you think about an airport, when you think about half of the passengers, half of the 33 million people, so almost 17 million people, are the people who are getting on aircraft. And we all know what happens when you get on aircraft these days. You get there early, but you don't know where the security line is going to be, so you're through security, and now you got a bunch of time to waste, right? So what do? I mean, some people get on a laptop, check Facebook. Other people just sort of wander around, look out the windows. If you have small kids, you're standing there holding their hand at the window because they want to look out the window. And we have a tremendous opportunity to educate people about the environment. Most of what we do is unique to airports. So it's not like they're going to go home and say, oh, all right, let's do a PC Air thing for your go-kart. It's not, you know, we're not going to be able to translate it to the home, but we can talk about it. We actually had a project that we had with a number of environmental education students a few years ago, came up with fabulous ideas about how we could use the airport for environmental education, but we could never figure out how to find the space to do it. And because we had to use hold room space where people want to sit and wait for their aircraft. And it's going to cost a bunch of money. And so we kept trying to get in the budget, couldn't quite make it work. Some folks have come up with a fabulous ideas using, not surprisingly, technology. And so what you see here is a mock-up of what we're going to be doing on the right. So on the top is actually a view out our window. And there you've got a transparent window sticky, there's probably a better word than that, that says we do recycling. And down below is the cover of the dumpster that says this is recycling. And what you can't see unless you're looking really closely, next to the big word recycling on the top is a QR code. So you get it out, shoot the QR code, and now you're to the whole website that explains the whole recycling program. So we'll be doing this with Preconditioned Air. We'll be doing it with anything you can see from the terminal. We're going to do this kind of thing. I mean, how cheap is this? We got to put a cover on the recycling thing, and we put a little window sticky with a QR code on it. And as opposed to building stuff that goes out of date quick, and then you got to replace it, it takes too much space in the terminal. And I was thrilled with our folks who came up with this idea. So we actually think that in some ways, from an impact on society, and you may remember that at the beginning I talked about the our goal statement was to be a leader in our industry and in our community. And this is all about trying to use Seatac Airport as a way to communicate to the local area about what's possible. So what comes next? Here's some of the stuff we're looking at doing going forward. Airports have to do a master plan every 10 to 15 years. We last did ours in 1995. We need to update our master plan, and this is a requirement of the Federal Aviation Administration, so we've got to tell them where we're going, how many people we expect to handle in the future, et cetera, how we're going to use our property. And we're going to be the first one to do a sustainable master plan. So it is a master plan. It is all of the things it needs to be as far as land use planning, et cetera. But we're also going to do it and say, how are we going to do all of this in the most sustainable way possible? Yeah. Second, as I mentioned earlier, whether it's greenhouse gas stuff, trying to find ways where we can reduce our airline customers' operating costs, or recycling and help them save money by recycling instead of throwing things away. We're constantly mining opportunities to help our customers and our vendors be more effective on the environmental front. Probably move to more electrical vehicles, substitute electricity for CNG because it would appear to be a much better greenhouse gas budget. Some of the other things, lots of people are doing green roofs, et cetera. Update our strategy plan. One of the biggest problems of moving composting from the back of the kitchen to the front is, you know, the people in the back of the kitchen come to work there every day. Okay, this is what we do, and they do it every day. People in the front, we've got 33 million different people. I mean, they're not all different, but we got 33 million people going through the place, and they're not used to it. And so trying to get them to compost with accuracy as to what goes in compost, what can be recycled, what goes into food waste, et cetera. You see the cans around here. You wouldn't think it would be that hard in the Northwest, right? But you see somebody from Kentucky looking at those things wondering, what am I supposed to do here? I mean, sometimes we actually have to explain what composting is and believe it or not, even recycling. And with foreign folks, it's even a bigger challenge. And one of the biggest problems at the industrial level is serviceware, knives and forks. And you can get compostable stuff. It's a little bit more expensive, but we don't buy it. So how do we get our tenants to use compostable stuff? Because that's what, more than anything else, pollutes the composting stream for us. And then I've got a question mark after carbon neutrality of whether or not seeking to be carbon neutral in a policy way still is relevant. The president said 3 days ago that we're going to take on climate change. We're going to deal with climate change, which I was thrilled to hear. It is a huge political lift to do that in a meaningful way, so we'll see how that happens. But most would think it probably means something like a carbon tax. The cap and trade probably is going to be hard to do at the federal level, but some sort of carbon tax might be a little simpler. So if we're going to do that, and you have now internalized the externalities associated with carbon emissions, do you need to seek carbon neutrality at a policy level, or is that take care of it? So it's an interesting question. We've been thinking we want to move towards carbon neutrality. That may just change a lot of what we're thinking about. And then I'll do a sustainable lounge. There's a few airports around the world. Amsterdam has one. Has created an area for customers to hang out and enjoy themselves while they're waiting for their plane. And it is living walls, water, it's a very cool space, and it's a huge opportunity for environmental education. Not only is it a great place to hang out, but it also lets people open up their minds a little bit to the natural world, and you get to bring them from an inside space into the natural world, even though they're still in the inside space. And so we're hopefully going to have a pilot one of those going in at Seatac in a little while. So back to where I started, hiding in plain sight. As I said, some of the stuff seems incredibly obvious. Well, why wouldn't you do this, right? It seems like it makes eminent sense. The path to not only conceive of it, but then to convince the airlines that it's a good investment is what's hidden. And that's where the fun comes, that's where the challenge comes, where the opportunity is. And that's where you all, as you leave here in the next several years and get out into the big, ugly world out there, will have the fabulous opportunity to be the sleuth, figure out what's possible, and then figure out how to make it happen. And it will be enormous fun for you, and I wish you the best. So with that, I'm going to stop and answer any questions that might come up. That'll be somebody. Here we are.
This arose last year. I was working on a project that related to seeing if Western would implement an energy policy. I think I remember stumbling across Sea-Tac as having an energy policy. Is that correct? Well,
We have one of our 21 goals that we set out in our environmental plan had us first not growing our power use no matter what. We expect with the footprint we have at Seatac that we will be able to double the throughput there. We think we can also double the throughput without expanding our terminal, which means much greater throughput. But we also are going to use conservation and renewables to meet all load growth.
So how do we move Western towards implementing an energy policy?
Well, that's a good question. I'm not sure I can get there. I'll tell you one of the things that helped. I had some really creative people who figured out how, due to the weirdness of Washington state law and federal energy regulation, that we created electricity utility. So we actually resell the power we buy to our customers who are on, the airlines, et cetera. And because we were doing that, we were able to get ourselves classified legally as an electric utility, which means we get to buy power from Bonneville Power Administration at the lowest rates in the entire country, just like all of the utilities do around here. But that's the great news. From an environmental point of view, the equally great news, but from somebody else's point of view, they may not think so, is Bonneville finally a couple years ago said you will be able to buy power at the cheap rate, which is almost all hydro. Unfortunately, there's one nuke that's in there too, which is much more expensive, up to your current use as of, I think, October of 2011 or something like that. Any load growth above that level, you've got to pay the incremental cost, the marginal cost of that power. We're not going to dilute that with the hydro cost, which is very, very, very low. And that means that if you are willing, if you're going to let your power demand go above that level, you're going to pay through the nose. So that adds an enormous economic incentive to find something cheaper. And conservation for the next 30 years will always be cheaper than, because there's just so much out there to be had. Yeah.
What kind of energy do you use right now besides hydropower? Are you doing sustainable things?
Well, we at the moment have by all of our power, it's delivered by Puget Sound Energy, but it's all purchased from Bonneville at their tier 1. So that means we get whatever Bonneville is using, which is mostly hydro, certainly a fair amount of wind, which is of course intermittent, the one nuke, and then they firm it up with gas turbines. So we get whatever Bonneville produces. We will be able, and in infrastructure, we've got, I'm going to say 20 million square feet of facilities. I don't know if that's the right number, but it's a lot. There is huge energy efficiency stuff for us to do, just in moving air around. Most of the, so you go to Seatac, it should be 70 degrees or so. All of the vast majority of the energy used to keep the facility at around 70 degrees is used to move air. It's not heating or cooling the air very much at all, because we and the electronic devices take care of keeping the heat in the building, even on days like we had last week in January, but it needs to be moved around the building. Well, those fans are 40 years old, unbelievably inefficient compared to fans today. So just upgrading the fans is going to save us enormous amounts of power. So we will be harvesting conservation for years and years to come. Yeah.
You mentioned one of your goals was to be the most environmentally sustainable airport in the world. How do you measure that, and what airports do you look at currently as leaders?
Well, you can measure it in a bunch of different ways. Certainly the easiest way to do it is who's doing what and who's taking initiatives. And the number of requests from my staff to go fly all over the country and the world to explain what we're doing is sort of the easiest way to do it. We have gotten various awards from national airport industry associations who sort of evaluate it. We are increasingly trying, and it's hard to do because there's not a lot of competitors out there for this kind of status, to do it on more obvious metrics. You know, energy consumption per passenger and things like that. The trouble is, if you're comparing San Diego and Buffalo on energy consumption per passenger, it's not a very fair comparison. San Diego could be sitting on its hands and Buffalo can be busting their butt, and still Buffalo is always going to look like more energy consumption per passenger just because of where it exists. Oh.
Yeah, the airline industry is pretty dynamic. As you said, a lot of passengers move through Seatac. How do you hope to change a lot of the business models that these airlines have, just to move to other airports? And with paying field coming online, you know, I know sustainability is a key, but at some point you may have a drop in passengers. So, and how do you deal with that?
Payne Field, for those of you who don't know, is in Snohomish County, just south of Everett, and they have been put, it's where Boeing manufactures its wide-body aircraft, and they've been pushed to start or allow commercial passenger service. Big fight that'll take another 5 years at least on litigation to determine whether that's actually going to happen, I'm sure. But one of the slides I showed at the beginning had Seatac in the center and all the international routes. That is one of the anchors. There's only one airline who is well known that can live on its own, and that's Southwest Airlines, because they don't connect to other airlines by bags. They won't deliver your bag to other airlines. You're going to have to go get it and then take it and rebook it. So they tried to move to Boeing Field a while ago. We were able to stop that because they were abandoning all the costs they had left behind at Seatac. But other than very small Allegiant and other carriers that are focused on very small tourist markets, they all need to be together. So we'll lose a few passengers eventually to Payne Field, but it's not going to be a significant problem for us. Yeah.
So your introduction had a statement about 18 destinations, 18 international flights that are presumably as frequently as once or twice
Daily.
a day.
They're, with the exception of one, they're 4 times a week and above, and almost all of them are daily.
Yeah. And so these really long distance flights, and the 787 is addressing some of these from the engineering side, but these really, all other things being equal, these really, really long flights are hyper-consumptive of jet fuel,
right,
and therefore hyper-productive of carbon dioxide, right? Because of the quantity of fuel necessary to be lifted to complete the
further you go, the more weight you're carrying just to carry the fuel to get you there.
Right. And so given that, and I understand that it's not high on your agenda because you already said we can't really do anything about that. Are you looking at, I mean, that big slice of the pie that was all CO2 emissions from jets, is there anything you are considering about that with respect to any kind of leverage you can pull with the airlines to see if they're interested in it?
Well, the slide that I mentioned, the sustainable aviation fuels, that's what that's all about. Because bottom line is 99% of the greenhouse gas impacts from airlines, it's probably well north of 99%, is as a result of the fuel they burn in their aircraft. So helping facilitate, we don't touch the fuel, ever. We lease space for an entity that delivers the fuel, but that's as close as we get to it. So it's real limited as to what we can do directly, but working with, as I said, Boeing and Alaska and a bunch of other folks, raising the visibility, trying to facilitate the movement towards biofuels is the key. I have this vision, I don't know that it will come to pass, but there's enough municipal solid waste in Seattle with current conversion techniques could be turned into all the jet fuel Seatac needs. Now, it would divert a lot of recycling from the traditional recycling direction, and the people who are vested, all of life is about who's vested in what economic need, and there's a recycling industry. And so the folks who rely on that are not going to want to have the bottles and the paper and the plastic, et cetera, diverted to biofuels because they make money on it moving the way they want it to move. So it's a sort of public policy discussion of where are we better off? What is the better use of it? And we haven't done any analysis to answer that question, but to me, if we can start diverting municipal solid waste into jet fuel where we can decrease by 70 to 80% the carbon emissions, that seems like a pretty high public good and worth looking at. Yeah.
You're absolutely correct. I applaud you. I also applaud you on your public waste handling, recycling efforts. It's accessible, it's understandable. Some of the best I've ever seen in the world. Great job.
Well, thank you. Thank you. So another hand, yeah.
Why haven't airplanes already been doing the optimized descent instead of the step down?
Yeah, and I know we're at 4:50, so if people have classes they have to run to, I understand. I'm here for a while. I'm willing to stick around for questions if people want to stick around. So the question is, why have the airlines not already been doing the step down on the optimized descent profile, this thing here, versus the traditional way? The simple answer is, I get back to one of the first words I used, safety. We actually, before our noise program, we keep track of every single airplane that comes in and out of Seatac every single day. We archive that information, probably for a couple of years before we do it. And if I put up there all of the flight paths that come in and out of Seatac, it would sort of fill the screen, and you need an interpreter to help you understand why they are what they are. And then you've got Boeing Field underneath that. Then there's Auburn, and you got Renton south of Seatac, and you got Payne Field north of Seatac, and they all have much fewer flights, obviously, but they are all in very specific flights. So the reason why on the horizontal two-dimension, the reason why the flights go all the way up there and come straight down is because the technology to ensure that they won't hit another airplane requires them to. So the GPS on the horizontal dimension, it's called required navigation performance, essentially a GPS capability, allows us to be really, really confident that if they're using it, they're going to stay within 100 feet of the line. on the horizontal. But you still need to do something about the vertical. You don't have a GPS line on the vertical. So it's all about practice. And you need to do this in a way that you're 100%, not 99.99999, but 100% positive that absent human error, these guys aren't going to hit each other. And we only just now have gotten, it took 6 years, the last 2.5 to 3 years was spent training pilots, training air traffic controllers, and fine-tuning and testing the technology to make that possible. And that's why it's so hard. There's no possibility of anything less than 100% confidence in it working. Yeah.
With the traffic volume in airports, has there ever been any discussion on building floors that collect human energy? Like, I know in Japan, in some of their subways, they have that, and then that powers like the lights around it, because there's so much.
Oh, the movement.
The movement.
You know, that's a good question. I have to admit, I've never been part of a conversation about that, and I'm probably, as an airport director, closer to these kinds of conversations than almost any of my colleagues, so that probably is a pretty good indication. Certainly, people have probably heard that there are some healthcare or workout facilities where they actually, you get on the Stairmaster and you're actually driving some energy. So this would be an interesting version of that on a pure horizontal frame. I guess it probably gets to wave energy, right? It's essentially the same thing at a very micro scale, is pushing down and getting the bounce back and capturing that energy. So I'm going to have to take that one home with me. Anything else? Well, thanks again for putting up with me. I appreciate it, and hopefully 25, 30, or maybe even longer, you'll be back here telling stories like this one.